Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny. I'm here with Pete, and today we're with Jim Johnson, project manager with Modiphius Entertainment for Star Trek Adventures. How are you, Jim?
Doing great, Manny. Thanks so much for having me on the show again.
Today we're going to talk about Star Trek Adventures Technical Manual. Very excited to talk to you about this. There's some really cool things in here. First things first, let's talk about what is this book exactly. How would you best describe this book?
Yeah, I think this is a technical manual covering the entirety of the Star Trek franchise. Almost to date, we didn't have enough time to include any content for Section 31. Of course, since that movie just came out a couple of months ago, we were well wrapped up with the manuscript and the layout and everything well prior to that. And we don't get advanced information about what's in the movies, right? So we didn't know any more than the fans did until the movie came out. But from the original series all the way up to Picard and Lower Decks and stuff, there's something in here for everybody, whether you're following old Trek, new Trek, or a little bit of both.
Would you say that this book was brainstormed or put together around the same time as the starter set? And the reason why I asked that is because the design of the cover seemed very similar.
Let's see. So we were wrapping up the starter set when we were working on this, and of course Ariel Orea, our art director, he's been working on everything Star Trek second edition related, and so certainly he and I have had a certain vision for the art style as a whole on the line, and it doesn't surprise me that you see some similarities to this. I mean, we really wanted the covers of most of the second edition products to be focused on characters, as opposed to the starships and pew pew and which is great. Don't get me wrong. I think we really wanted to try to focus more on characters than not in the new edition, and I think you'll see that in this cover and then future covers for other products that we have coming up. But yeah, I mean, this is clearly either an away team or a group of characters in a situation, in an environment, and I think we didn't do a huge number of those kind of covers in first edition, and thought it would be a nice change of pace to do something different, because of course in a role-playing game, characters are primary, right? We don't Star Trek Adventures is not a combat simulation, it's not a starship combat game, it's a role-playing game. It's about characters, and we thought that putting the characters front and center as frequently as possible was the direction we wanted to go in.
So this book reminds me a lot of the Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, where but like the best parts of the Dungeon Master's Guide, where you have lots of player options, equipment, different adventure options, lots of charts for different things, especially for complications. Would you say this book is kind of like almost like like a second part in the sense of the core rulebook? Because it seems like there's a lot of really interesting things in this book.
Those are some really interesting comments, Manny. I think this book was really intended to be it's really intended to support both players and game masters, right? So the players get the entirety of chapter 1 is all new character stuff, right? It's new talents, it's new career events, it's new things, it's the ability to add minds to your game. Yeah, of course, game masters can use that, but players too. And then throughout the book, we have descriptions and information about all kinds of equipment all across the Star Trek universe, and that kind of stuff can be useful for players, but it can also be useful for game masters, right? If they want to introduce new technologies or existing technologies into their game. What you might be referring to, though, is probably the complication tables. All those great complication tables that we put into the game, which are really more oriented for, I guess they're more oriented for game masters, but honestly, if players are feeling, and hopefully they are, if players are feeling, empowered and feel like they have the agency that they can also contribute, advantages and complications to the game, which of course they're able to do by spending momentum or giving the game master threat. Those complication tables could be used by players as well, so that if they're in a situation and all of a sudden their tricorder doesn't work, or something goes wrong with the transporters, or something goes wrong with the EPS conduits or something, there's a random table in the book that they can roll on if they need a little bit of help creatively to come up with a complication. They can rely on the random tables. So I think I I'm not that familiar with the newer Game Master guide, the Dungeon Master guide. So I don't know what kind of utilities are in there for both players and Game Masters. But this one certainly was intended for both audiences, and we even made sure it was compatible with both First Edition and Captain's Log. So if you're a solo Captain's Log player, you can use this. If you're playing First Edition, you can use it. But hopefully, both both players and Game Masters will get something out of this one.
When I first opened the book, or the PDF really, the first thing that for whatever reason, the table of contents kind of like struck me with the way you had everything sectioned out. So what inspired the layout of the book? Like basically the different categories of technology. How'd you guys come up with that?
Any one of our products always goes through a lot of development work ahead of time, and most of that involves me sitting down and thinking about the outline. And as a team, we talk about, okay, what's the high level goals and concepts for this product, and then I sit down and figure out, okay, now I got to outline it, and what's that going to look like? How many chapters do we need? What are the chapters going to be about? And knowing that after 60 years of Star Trek, there is so much great technology and so much information out there about it. We knew that in 128 pages, we couldn't hope to cover everything at a deep level, right? So we tried to really go for the most important stuff at a little bit of a broader view, although we did do some deep dives here and there where we could. And it was a matter of, once I understood what we were trying to do, it was just a matter of grouping out what we wanted to focus on. We knew one chapter would be entirely devoted to new mechanics. So Nathan Dowdell, the system developer, he pretty much had free reign to do that. And so, okay, we want new talents, we want new career options, we want this new stuff, all somehow oriented toward technology, right? So the engineers and even security folks in your groups are probably going to enjoy this book. Scientists certainly, because there's just so much technology that touches so many different parts of the crew, right? Even if you're not Starfleet, I mean, Klingons, Romulans, etc., they're still going to use the same kind of technology. And then it was just a matter of grouping it out. It's like, okay, I knew I wanted a chapter on scientific equipment, a chapter on medical equipment, a chapter on engineering equipment, so on down the line. And then just through the art of working the manuscript, right, figuring out what was the right grouping, what was the right order to put them in, and then once we got to the design phase, we got to play with the colors a little bit, and we started doing this in the core book, where some chapters are gold colored and some blue colored and some are red colored, just harkening back and tying into the 3 department colors or the 3 division colors of Starfleet. And just went from there. So I think it was just a matter of, being deliberate about what we wanted to include, and then figuring out what were the high level groupings for each of those categories, and then having the writing team going forth and writing each of those chapters out.
You kind of hit upon the fact that there is discussion on the technology of other races, and I want to say I was pleasantly surprised by that, because I don't know why I thought that this was going to be like very Federation focused. And so I was pleasantly surprised to see that there was Klingon technology, Romulan technology as well, Ferengi technology. I don't know why I often just forget about the Ferengi, but they're there, So it was, like I said, I was just pleasantly surprised to see all that in there.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And I think that's why you'll also find one of the prominent characters on the cover is an Orion, right? Zara Ketix, who makes an appearance in the Quick Start adventure, is one of the main characters on the cover there. And we're really trying, especially with the core book, we're trying to give players and game masters the sense that there's more to Star Trek Adventures than just Starfleet, right? You can play Orions, you can play Romulans, you can play Klingons, you can play any species from the huge Star Trek tapestry. We certainly don't have the page count or the room to address every single one of them. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of species in Star Trek, but we can at least, give Starfleet the primary focus, because I still think, even after 8 years of following the game fans on social media, I think the very, very large majority of games out there are Starfleet, or at least Starfleet adjacent. And but there's still a strong component of Klingon games and Romulan games and other games, and I wanted to make sure we at least paid some service to each of them. And for the technical manual, I mean, we've seen so much technology in the shows that aren't Starfleet, that are even beyond Starfleet's capabilities or far below Starfleet capabilities. And it was an opportunity to touch on a lot of them where we could. So yeah, in some of these chapters, you'll see, we go into some details on non-Starfleet technologies and how it's very similar, and then also how it's different as well. So that's a very intentional decision that we've made for second edition, and you'll see that in other products as well, where we're trying to focus primarily on Starfleet, but also still have chunks of stuff that are relevant to other species as well.
I really like the certain aspects of the book where you challenge game masters and players to think beyond the equipment that they're given. Like there's a section here about universal translators. Star Trek Discovery had this great episode when they met these aliens where the universal translator just didn't work. So they had to figure out a new way of connecting to these aliens. And I like that these rules are, well, I won't say rules. These are, you don't show them as rules. It's almost like this is like a discussion you're having with players and game masters to kind of challenge them to kind of think beyond what they're given, so that you could give that way game masters could give players more problems to solve and things to figure out for their adventures. Was that kind of what you were trying to do with this book, to kind of expand players' horizons when it comes to what they can do in the Star Trek universe?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you might be talking about the sidebar that's on the bottom of page 51, talking or thinking outside the talk, where we try to provide some other ways. Like language is not just verbal, right? It can be nonverbal. It can be all kinds of things, and we tried to play with that and try to give you some ideas. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to make sure we did that in a lot of the chapters, providing these kind of sidebars of advice and information, is that, in this day and age, it's so easy to get information about Star Trek online, right? You can go to any number of websites and it'll give you the stuff, information about stuff for 60 years worth of Star Trek, right? An equipment book, it's like, yeah, okay, it's an equipment book. I can go read about that on Memory Alpha or Memory Beta, or all the different websites that are out there. But what we're able to do is we're able to put that RPG lens on it, right? To say, there hasn't been a RPG technical manual for decades, right? And certainly not one that covers all the new Trek for those that are fans of new Trek. And so I really wanted, we started doing this with the player guide and the game master guide, where we were, talking about the game, but we were also providing very clear, specific advice, talking to the players, talking to the game masters, almost as if we're sitting around a table or we're sitting on a call together, saying, hey, here's these cool things that you're doing in the game. Here's another way to think about it. Here's another way to try things. Do something different. Don't just rely on the rule book and telling you what you can and cannot do. Think outside the box. Get a little flexible, because Star Trek Adventures is a really flexible game, especially with like traits and focuses and values. Right? There's a lot of flexibility in it, and we're really trying to encourage players to get out of the, for them who've played other types of games, to get out of that mindset of like, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do, because it's written in the rule book, and that is all I can do, right? It's just this written specific information. And so we're just trying to give ideas and suggestions about how to do, try things differently. I wish we could do more. Like, I wish I had more room to do more sidebars like that, but it's always a balancing act to balance out the text and the sidebars and the art and everything else. It's just a real good challenge to try to balance it out. So hopefully there's enough sidebars like that in the book that people will get excited and say, oh, I didn't think of it that way. I didn't think of trying it that way. Maybe I can do that. And hopefully that's going to encourage both players to be more creative, but also game masters too. So a game master, might come at the game and say, oh, the universal translator is broken. So what do you do now? Maybe they'll take a moment and think about, oh, what are the impacts of taking that technology away from my players? What does that actually mean? How are they going to communicate, right? Like, all of a sudden your translator's gone and you're interacting with this completely alien species. How are you going to communicate? Like, you could just kind of like fudge it a little bit, but like, if your players are getting into character and really trying, and if you're getting into it as a game master, then there's consequences to taking stuff away from them, right?
We should really talk about some of the character options and equipment and Starship stuff and everything. I'm sure our viewers want to hear about that. But I have to say, and I mentioned this earlier in our interview, I really, really like the like complication charts.
Mhm.
Just because, let's see if I can find a quick example of, oh, here's one, universal translator complications. The reason why is because I know as a game master myself, sometimes I can't help it to hit a wall at times when
Mhm.
I'm doing a game. If the transporter goes haywire because my engineer fumbled his roles or her roles
Mhm.
or their roles, what happens? And trying to sometimes to think of something on the spot. A lot of times I'm good at that, but sometimes I don't want to. I'm trying to figure something out, especially if it's a complicated scenario. I don't want to hit that wall and slow the game down.
Right.
But yeah, so it's not really a question. I just want to say I really, really like these complication tables, and I'm glad
Mhm.
they're added to the game because um, they're so helpful.
Yeah.
I love fumble charts.
Yeah, that's funny. I think for a while, like the first couple of years, I was the project manager. I had a couple of writers like, "Oh, we should add random tables. We should add random tables," and I always resisted that because like this is just from a purely practical standpoint, right? A random table takes up so much space on the page, right? And I'm thinking, oh, I want more lore. I want more, I want more information about the setting and the characters and the world and the universe and what they can do with it, and like to commit like even this page right here, right? This is a 2/3 of a page devoted to that one table, and it's like when I've only got 128 pages to work with, how many tables can I put in here and quote unquote sacrifice other content that could be in here, and so over time they've worn me down a little bit, and I've come to accept that like it's really important to have really good tools for game masters and players to use. And I think that's why in the core rule book for second edition, we had one entire page devoted to sample values, right? It wasn't a random table, but the feedback we got from players was like, we need help coming up with values. We need help coming up with focuses. We need help coming up with advantages and complications and stuff. And it's like, okay, I get it. I understand. And so we tried to pack in as many complication tables as we could in this book. And I'm sure we could probably do a whole book on advantages and complications. And in fact, to some extent, that's what Captain's log is all the extra tables that are in there. But yeah, hopefully this will, hopefully folks will use these tables, not just to use the possibilities that we put on the page, but also maybe that'll spark an idea and they'll come up with something different as well. But if not, I think there's enough variety in these tables to be useful.
I just randomly put this page up. Beautiful image, but now I'm wondering what's happening here exactly.
Yeah.
Is this from an episode maybe I've forgotten about? Is this something new, if I may ask?
No, you'll that's actually a great point, Manny, that I don't think any other interviewer has ever brought up, which is interesting. I think the vast majority of our artwork is entirely original. It's not based on an episode. It's not based on a movie or anything. It's just Star Trek characters doing something interesting and different in the Star Trek universe. We've had a handful of pieces of art that were specifically oriented toward an episode or a key event that is shown from a different perspective or something. But this is entirely original. I think you'd have to look at it. This looks like an Enterprise era crew with an Andorian ally. It looks like they're checking out a probe or something, but clearly the probe is got a bunch of electricity going on, and maybe even a anti-gravity situation going on, because look, a lot of the rocks on the top there are floating. So I think every story, every piece of art tells a story, or at least good art tells a story, right? And I think it's going to be up to the players and the game masters to decide what story is this piece of art telling for them. Like I know some of our game masters like to mine our books for artwork, and they'll use that artwork in their episodes and campaigns, and they'll build a story around it, right? They'll build a story around that artwork, and it may be completely nothing related to the art brief that myself or Ariel might have written, but that's okay. In this case, I think Ariel wrote this art brief, and I think it was a bunch of aliens around a probe, and that might have been it. Other than to tell the artist, we're always looking for a diversity of characters, we're looking for a diversity of body shapes, and we're looking for a diversity of species and environments. And I think we may have let the artist just go wild with this one. So it's always a partnership, right, between myself and the art director and the artist too, because we want the artist to have a lot of input into what they're doing. Just in my experience, when you tell an artist to draw something, if you give them too much information, then they feel kind of constrained, right? Like they're not being able to add their own creativity and input to it. So we try to be a lot more collaborative all across the spectrum.
When you put this book together, was there anything you rediscovered, some fact or maybe an episode that brought a smile to your face? Was there anything about this when you look back and like, oh yeah, I remember doing this chapter brought back this episode that I love so much?
I don't know if there was any specific episode that came to mind, but I think when I wrote the introduction, so as the project manager, I've stepped back from doing most writing right on the line anymore. Like when I started with the game, 9 years ago, I was just a freelance writer, just writing content for the game, and gradually I worked my way into the project manager role. But by doing that means I stepped away from most of the writing, which is something I really enjoyed. But I've also found that I enjoy doing the actual, project management side of it. But I save the introductions for myself, right? So I write the introductions to all the books. And I think when I was reflecting on this one, writing the introduction, and like trying to take a big, broad perspective of like, why is technology important to Star Trek? And why is Star Trek important to modern technology, right? Because there's a real back and forth there. Because, Star Trek over the decades has influenced modern day scientists and engineers, and to the point where modern technology that we take for granted probably got started in Star Trek, right? We had flip top communicators before we had flip phones, and I'd argue we probably had wireless pads on Star Trek before we had pads in our homes, right? In our phones and our wireless communication devices and stuff. So I think just writing that introduction and trying to work my way through the different bullet points and trying to understand, the social and technological impact of Star Trek back and forth was a lot of fun, and it made me just reflect on how hardworking all of the set designers and prop makers and prop designers, like all those technical people who were working on the shows behind the scenes, to be able to give the actors really cool things to play with on screen and make them practical with like the blinky lights and the push buttons and all these stuff. Like it's just really cool, right? To be a model maker and to have your stuff be shown on screen, and not only to be able to show it on screen, but then to realize that device that you made up for a science fiction TV show actually turned out to be something that happened in real life, right? Someone took that concept and made it a thing, right? I mean, even like now, medical professionals, or the medical industry is working on, subcutaneous, the equivalent of hyposprays, and sensor technologies and stuff are all inspired by Star Trek to some extent. So I think it was just working my way through that introduction is what really sparked it. Again, I don't remember any particular episode coming to mind, although certainly I had a short list of episodes that I rewatched because I was working on this one. Or if like I said, Dayton had a bunch of great information in there about the first chapter. I don't even remember off the top of my head now. I have to go back and look at it. But he wrote a couple sidebars, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So that I had to go back and watch the episode and just appreciate it all over again. And hopefully with any luck, some game masters and players will get that little jolt too and go, oh yeah, I need to go watch that episode again, and just remember.
Let's talk a little bit more about the chapters in the book. So I'm sure our viewers want to know like what they can expect exactly. So we talked about the introduction. Let's talk a little bit about chapter 1, supplemental game mechanic with character options and starship options and so forth.
Yeah. So all the and forgive me for not looking at the camera. I got the litho proof here, so I'm just going to kind of flip through this as we're talking. So chapter 1, front and center. I know there is a gamers being gamers. We love our new crunch and we love our new mechanical bits, and we wanted to put that. I wanted to put that right up front and center. Here's all the cool mechanical stuff before we get into the lore and the technology and all that cool stuff. So for folks that are looking for more ideas on career events for their characters, that's a part of the life path. So if you want more options beyond what was in the core rulebook, we provide 10 new career events. All of them are related to science, technology, engineering type of stuff. Trying to run get a spread there. So give you some ideas there. There's like 20 new talents in here for characters, all across the six, all related to the six departments. Of course, they don't have to be tied to the six departments, but we provided a bunch of new options there. And then a couple sidebars about a couple of them. One of the things I really liked that Nathan did was there's a new talent called the Power of Math, which is kind of based off of Tilly and Discovery. But there's a little sidebar there that says, this talent, which allows you to perform rapid calculations in your head, there are certain characters in Star Trek who are gifted and incredibly smart and can do that just without even the talent, right? So there's a little bit of a side. So you added a sidebar to say, if you are one of these particularly brilliant characters, with I think you got like reason 11 plus, you can probably do this without this talent, right? And that's just kind of like a little extra side rule, not really a rule necessarily, but just another option for players and game masters to consider, that kind of stretches the boundaries of the game, right? Which I know certain game systems don't do that, because if it's not written in the book, then it doesn't exist. But we're trying to give you some ideas of like how you can play with the characters and their values and their ratings and stuff, and say, oh, you've got an 11 bearing, maybe you can do this kind of cool thing just without a talent or something, right? And really just kind of play with the idea that your character is more than just what's on their character sheet, right? It's just like what can you and your game master and your group come up with. We paid some homage to Strange New Worlds. Of course, Strange New Worlds being one of the more recent series that's actively in production, and it's one of the series that we just haven't had an opportunity to really write to yet, just by virtue of the timing of the second edition and stuff. So you'll recall the episode with in Strange New Worlds when Dr. Mbanga and Chapel are having to deal with the Klingons in I think it was the first season of the first episode of the second season. They take the combat stimulants. We provided some guidance and some rules on how to incorporate that into your game, if that's something that you want to do. Of course, there's positives and negatives to it, but we added that as an option just to try to get at the sense that Star Trek Adventures is for all of Star Trek, and so we've got classic stuff, alluding to classic stuff in here, and we've also got the newer stuff as well. Not to get too down in the weeds, but for Starships, we've got some new options for service records. Service records is a new mechanical element we added for second edition, just to help give Starships a little bit more uniqueness, right? Like, so characters certainly getting a lot of love in terms of like how characters can be distinct from each other in a lot of ways. And we wanted to make sure that players and game masters understood that you can do that for Starships too. And service records are just one way to kind of like add a little bit of new nuance to a Starship. So we provide some new options there, and then we also provide a few new talents, and then we I think it was it might have been the Federation Klingon War Tactical Campaign book. The last book we did for first edition introduced mines as another. I think it was that one. No, it was Utopia Planitia. My apologies. In Utopia Planitia, we introduced mines as another weapon type next to phasers and torpedoes, and we didn't have space to include them in the core rule book, and partly because we didn't have space, but also partly because Nathan made a really good argument that mines aren't used all that much in Star Trek, and mines are very much not a Federation type of weapon. So it almost kind of felt more optional to include it in the core book, but we definitely had the space to put them in here. So we updated them for second edition and put them in here, partly because of what we were talking about at the top of the show, where we're trying to present second edition as more broadly than just Starfleet. Like, you can play a Romulan game, you can play a Cardassian game, you can play a Klingon game. Certainly the Klingons and the Cardassians probably not shy about using mines. Ditto Ferengi and Orions, right? So I think if you are playing a game that's not Starfleet, or again Starfleet adjacent, maybe mines would be more of a factor in your game. And so now you've got that option to drop them in there if you want to. And I think that's oh no, you actually know there's a lot more to chapter 1. We talk about alternative propulsion device systems like transwarp and slipstream and that kind of stuff. And that's just really cool engineering technical stuff that maybe players and game masters will get into, especially if you're doing a game later in the 24th century, and you want to do something like the Protostar from Prodigy, or the Odyssey. I think for the Odyssey from Star Trek Online, and then Star Trek Picard. If you want to get into those newer types of propulsion technologies beyond just warp and impulse, that we put some options in here and added some rules and some guidance around those, because I know a lot of fans are hungry for like 25th century content, right? Like picking up where Picard ends and like what's next. And of course, there's not much canon there, but we can at least talk to what's in that late chunk of the 24th century that we've seen in Lower Decks and Picard and Prodigy. So we're trying to incorporate some of that content into here as well. So lots of cool stuff just in chapter 1, right?
And standard equipment.
Yeah, so standard equipment. This is like the really common stuff that you'll see all across, or at least that we see across most of the different civilizations. You got holograms, holography, talking about different ways holograms are used or holographic technology is used. You got personal display devices. Like we said, we talked about pads. It seems like, especially by the 24th century, it seems like everybody's got one, right? It's ubiquitous technology by that point for the most part. So I'm sure there's a certain amount of sharing technologies amongst species, even if they may not like each other. They're still borrowing or stealing each other's technologies and then reverse engineering it, right? Of course, and then you got like the Orions and the Ferengi, who are probably happy to sell to anybody. Personal communication devices, that's pretty much ubiquitous as well. I mean, I think everybody's got those. So what we're doing in this chapter is like presenting all this, key baseline technology, and talking about how it works for the purposes of the game, and also trying to provide that perspective of like, here's how the Federation does it, here's how the Cardassians do it, here's how the Romulans do it, and how they're all similar but maybe a little different. I think Dayton Ward wrote this chapter, and I really like some of the sidebars he put in here about, especially the one about, it's on page 40. It's about how replicators do have limitations. So it's something that you may not necessarily think about, but then you read it and you're like, oh yeah, there are some things that you can do and can't do with a replicator, and here's kind of like the in setting reasoning for that. So if you're a player or a game master and you may not know that much about Star Trek, but here you are playing a Star Trek game, this will hopefully give you a little bit of insight to say, oh, that's how that works in this setting. That's about how far I can go with it. It's not a magic device necessarily, or it's kind of magic, but it's got rules and limitations built around it. So we're trying to talk at that. And then of course there's some complication tables in here too for some of that basic technology. Here's what can go wrong with the hologram. Here's what can go wrong with your communicator. That kind of stuff. And hopefully that'll give players and game masters some ideas. Like you were saying, Manny, if they're in the moment and they get a block, right, and they can't creatively come up with something real quick, just grab a D20 and fire away, right?
All right. Chapter 3, diplomatic assets. We sort of talked about this already, or a little bit of it with the universal translators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we talk about try to talk about different diplomatic devices, like how does diplomacy work? How's the diplomatic corps work? Things that can go wrong with your universal translator. There's a really nice one of the things I appreciate about Michael Dismuke wrote this chapter, and there's a table on page 49 talking about encounters with alien languages, right? Maybe you don't have your universal translator, but you're dealing with this alien language. How difficult is that language to translate if you don't have the technology, right? Is it sort of similar to something that you are familiar with? Is it super, super different? Like how hard, and that'll help a game master kind of evaluate the difficulty range to use for any tasks related to it. So we're just, playing with those ideas. We talk also a little bit about how distress signals work, like what to do about a distress signal. What kind of, and there's a random table in there about different planetary crises. So, if you're a game master and your players are rolling up to a new planet that you've just created, there's some sort of distress signal going on. What's the nature of that distress signal, right? I think that's a pretty much a trope of Star Trek at this point is the opening teaser, crew is responding to a distress signal. What's it mean? And there's a random table in here that can help you get that story kicked off.
Chapter 4, scientific equipment.
Yep, and this is all all about. This expands on the equipment chapter from the core rule book, providing an array of different scientific devices that we've seen from the show. From isolinear optical storage, transponders, the exocomp chronometers. Just a lot of little vignettes, little blurbs about different pieces of technology. There's a whole subchapter devoted to tricorders and other types of scanning devices, including those complication tables. There's a whole sidebar about how different civilizations, tricorders are similar, but also a little bit different. Again, getting at the idea that if you're playing a non-Starfleet game, you've got the similar technology, but maybe your tricorder does things a little differently, right? Like I would have to assume that Klingon tricorders are probably ruggedized so that they could be used as a blunt force object if needed. And if they find themselves without a batleth or a dictog, they can use the tricorder as a blunt force weapon. What else? Other stuff like that. We talk about away teams. I think it's always nice to have more information about away teams. It's like it's a conceit when you're watching the show. It's like, okay, the away team's doing the plot, they're doing the adventure, but what does that actually mean for a Starfleet character, right? Like, okay, especially for a player who doesn't know Star Trek that well, right? It's like, oh, I've just been assigned to a away team. What does that mean? Like, maybe I haven't watched the show yet, or maybe I haven't seen enough episodes. Hopefully this will give you some ideas and some advice. And again, lots more random tables about what kind of things could be happening on the planet or off the planet. What kind of encounters could I be having when I get to the planet, right? Maybe the game master doesn't have a particular vision in mind of what's going to happen when the crew gets to this random planet with a random crisis and then beams down their away team for what's going to happen. I don't know. You can grab that random table. What is it on? Was it 63 or 64? There's a couple of different tables that you can roll on and just see what happens, right?
So, Chapter 5, medical technology. What can you tell us about it?
So that chapter, just like the other chapters, this one's entirely focused on medical devices. So talking about some of the different medical technologies, different types of drugs and their treatments. I mean, we probably could have filled the whole book on just Starfleet medical devices and technologies, but obviously we just didn't have the room to do it all here. But we talk about the medical tricorder in specific, as opposed to the regular tricorder, different drugs and treatments. We get into medical enhancements, so we're talking about like wheelchairs, cybernetics, other types of devices that are used to support folks. We talk a little bit about augmentation and enhancements. Getting into genetics and DNA and stuff. Different types of implants that we've seen on the show, and that might be useful for players to diversify their characters a bit. Importantly, to note that for the most part, we don't talk about, we don't present devices and provide a bunch of mechanics around them. We've left mechanics mostly out of it because, in Star Trek Adventures, especially second edition, the vast majority of equipment is a trait, right? And so the trait allows you to do something or prevents you from doing something, or makes certain things easier or makes certain things harder. And so you're not going to find a lot of actual like mechanical stuff in here, like unlike other RPGs where you'll buy a gear book and it'll have all kinds of, interesting mechanical stuff to it. We didn't need that in second edition, especially because everything's a trait, and traits are already built into the game system to impact task attempts and stuff. So it'll be interesting to see what the reaction of the fans is to that. Where the phaser one doesn't do more damage than another phaser necessarily. All the stat blocks are already in the core book, so we didn't feel the need to repeat that here because a page count, but also B, we wanted to provide more interesting content. And like I said before, phaser is a phaser for the most part. It's not going to be really fundamentally different from Enterprise to Picard or whatever. But yeah, so that medical technology then covers all the different medical stuff. There's a great sidebar in there about the about using replicators and holographic technology as medical devices. You know, trying to take what we've seen on the show and just trying to expand that out. Like, you know, we had that one episode where Neelix's lungs are replaced by holographic lungs, but there was a limitation, right? He couldn't move. He had to be completely stationary and immobile. But what happens when, you know, inevitably technology advances, right? We've seen even in the last 60 years, right? Technology gets better and better, and it gets smaller, right? Technology gets miniaturized and it gets more powerful to the point where, you know, our cell phones are more powerful than the Apollo going up to the moon, right? It's just technology change, like the supercomputers in the 50s and 60s were, you know, building sized, right? They're huge room sized computers, and now they fit in our hand, right? So it's just, that's how technology works. So, like, you know, in that episode of Voyager, in that time period of, you know, 2370s, that technology, that holographic technology, had not advanced to the point where he could have holographic lungs but be walking around. But there's absolutely no reason to think that, certainly by the 32nd century, maybe it's possible. Maybe of course, by that point, they probably are able to genetically, you know, build you a new set of lungs or something. But maybe you're an edge case, and you've got something in your DNA that can't be changed or can't be differentiated, and maybe they've figured out a way to give you a mobile emitter, which we've already seen the technology for. So maybe you have a mobile emitter that can, you know, create holographic lungs for you, but also create like a stable force field kind of thing around you, so that you don't have to worry about falling or tripping and then your lungs being knocked out of alignment and then you dying, right? So, I mean, the technology is there, and it's just it's a way to play with it and connect the dots in a way that maybe hasn't been done before, and say, you know, here's the technology that Star Trek presents to us. Let's take that to the next logical step and say, what if this, what if that, what if that? And I think, you know, Star Trek certainly, but science fiction in general is really good at asking what if, right? And so we're trying with this book, and with our other second edition books, we're trying to touch on that a little bit and really encourage players and game masters to think beyond what they're seeing on the screen, and how can they bring that to the game table and just add even more to the awesome stories that they're going to be telling together.
I'm tempted to talk more about hologram stuff, because I have some thoughts about like in the I believe it's the finale for Voyager, where they looked into the possible future where the Doctor can walk outside the bounds of the Doctor's room. He has this device where he's physical and walking around, but that's a different video. Let's go to chapter 6, engineering technology.
Before we continue, I'm sorry, I had a question, because you had spoken before about what's canonical, and you spoke about the 25th century and how that's not canon yet. Do you see like the possibility of, like, say, companion pieces to something like this? You know, as I guess as Trek expands, or as new things are added, like, can you see like another edition of this book, or maybe like a companion piece, if not an entire edition, coming out for it?
That's a good question. I think you know, throughout the entirety of the line for Star Trek Adventures, we've been careful to stay pretty close to canon. I think partly because we don't want to create a whole bunch of stuff whole cloth and make casual fans and casual gamers read something and go, oh, what episode was that in? I don't know what episode that was in. And then they try to go find it and they get confused and frustrated. But we also want to be respectful of the license and the property, so that our licensors don't read something in the manuscript and go, oh, what episode is that from? Or, you know, where did you get that from? And we're like, oh, we made that up? Is that okay? So we're trying to be careful about not creating too much original stuff, and really focusing on, like, okay, here's what's canon, here's what we've seen on screen, here's how to do cool stuff with it, and here's how to take it to a different level and do different things with it. I think if Star Trek were to do a series set after Picard, like somewhere in that sweet spot between Picard and Discovery, I mean, sure, if we get the license to do it and there's enough cool stuff there, I'm sure we would continue to build on it. I think, I mean, the great thing about Star Trek is they've been creating new content for, 60 years now. We know that there's more Strange New Worlds coming. We know there's a new series coming. hopefully some new movies at some point. But there's always new canon, screen Star Trek coming, and especially with Strange New Worlds, and of course Lower Decks is probably done now, but especially Strange New Worlds, they've been willing to play with the timeline, right? They've been doing time travel episodes. They've, even the last season of Lower Decks opened up the whole multiverse. So you got, between Lower Decks and Prodigy, because like second season of Prodigy opened up a lot of time travel shenanigans. So I think anything is possible where they could elaborate on the 25th century, or even somewhere between the 25th and the 32nd. Maybe they'll do a series on the temporal Cold War at some point. I don't know, but I don't think this technical manual may be the latest and greatest technical manual right now. But in 5 years, when we have another 5 years of new Trek to enjoy, I'm sure at that point, assuming all things being equal, we still have the license and we're still doing it. Knock on wood. Maybe we'll do another technology book and say, hey, in the last 5 years, Star Trek has added a whole bunch more cool new technology and has expanded what's possible in the 25th century and the 26th century or whatever. Sure, yeah, then we would certainly look at that. But I don't think right away. We've got this one coming out. We got other stuff to come. So I think I don't know if that answers your question, Peter.
Yeah, well, I was speaking more. I was speaking more of canon. I wasn't necessarily talking about original material from Modiphius. Yeah. What I was saying was like, okay, say like there's a new 25th century show that comes out tomorrow. Like we hear about, oh wow, they're doing a new series. Like, could you see doing a companion piece for that? Like, how would that work? Would it be another edition of the book, or would it be like just a companion piece for this? That's what I guess I'm asking.
Oh yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. I don't know. I think we'd have. I probably know if I just sit here and think about it. I don't think we would do a revised edition of this. I think we would do a new book, and we would figure out how do we incorporate all the cool stuff we just saw in that new series and add something else to it. Like, again, I don't even know what that would look like. But I don't think we would do like a technical manual version 2 and just like add more stuff to the existing one. Right. Partly because I can't speak for Modiphius's philosophy, but me personally, as a gamer, I don't like buying the same content more than once. Or maybe twice if there's really good new content in it. But I'm allergic to buying a revised edition of a thing just because I'm getting like 10 pages of new content. Like, give me something new. Incorporate that content, but give me something new. Gotcha. And I think that's why we decided that at the moment we're not going to reprint any first edition stuff updated to second edition. Right? We're gonna do new stuff. That's why we're doing a technical manual, which is something we didn't do in first edition. And we're going to try to move forward with new stuff so that we're not doing, the Alpha Quadrant book version 2. We're not doing the Beta Quadrant book version 2, etc. We're trying to present, we may present some of the same content in a new way. And, certainly like some of the species have been revised and the space frames will be revised, but we're not going to do wholesale copy paste from first edition to second edition. Because me personally, I'd rather commission people to do new stuff, and I think fans want new stuff, right? Yeah. We did that. Of course, I know we're not reprinting this stuff, and some people are frustrated about that, but we want to continue forward with new content as much as possible.
Oh, so yes, chapter 6, engineering technology.
So we were talking about engineering technology. So this goes into a little bit of detail on all the different cool stuff that's part of Starship, right? The ODN network and the transporters and the engineering room and all these places and things that you see a lot on the shows and that are constantly referenced on the shows. What does that mean in a game context, right? Like here's basic information that you can get about it, and then here's how to put it to use in an RPG, and then with the complication tables, right? Here's how to break it. Here's how when things go wrong, here's how that impacts your players and your characters. I think we didn't have the space to go into minutia detail. And honestly, there's fantastic technical manuals that have been out over the last 30 years. Obviously the most notable one being the one that Mike Okuda and Rick Sternbach wrote back in 1991, the Star Trek Next Generation technical manual. That's certainly not the only one. Franz Joseph did a fabulous technical manual back in the day. There's other ones too. There's been a number of technical manuals over the decades, that were our foundational research materials for this book. And we were like, no, we're not gonna rehash it, right? There's no need to rehash it because those books are still in print and they're still available. And I'm willing to bet they're on the shelves of most of the Star Trek fans anyway. Like I know I'm on my second copy of the tech manual because I wore out the first one. So I think I assumed, more than likely a lot of fans are going to have access to one or some of those books. And if not, they're readily available. In fact, I'm sure your local library probably has copies of these things because they've been out forever, and they're not going to go away because, like I said, they're all still most of them are still in print, or at least readily available. So again, we're putting that Star Trek Adventures spin on it. It's like, okay, well, this is a computer core. Here's how our computer core works, but how does it work for the purposes of your characters and for your game? So you'll see a lot of detail in this chapter 6 about computer systems, different types of tools. We also, talk about different pieces of technology. This is building on a little bit from what was in the core book. Of course, the core book, we didn't have a huge amount of space to go into the weeds about all the different technological devices, but we added more of them in here so that your engineers and your scientists have more cool gadgets that they can at least reference. And, everybody loves to throw out technobabble. So, you're not just using a screwdriver, you're using a resonance imager. You get different technology, different ways of phrasing it, different things you can play with there. And again, like I said, more complication tables if you want to figure out how it broke and what the players are going to do about it.
Chapter 7, weapons and tactical gear, which I'm sure a lot of players want to know more about.
Yep. So weapons and tactical gear. This is Dayton's other chapter. He wrote 2 chapters for this book, and he had I said, tell me all about melee weapons, ranged weapons, and uniforms and tactical gear all across the Star Trek franchise. And if you want to know the A to Z of how phase pistols and ranged weapons evolved from the first time we see the first episode of Enterprise all the way out to the 32nd century. Here's all the different varieties. Like, I mean, we've had how many different versions of phasers all across all across Star Trek? Because it's like every series and every movie needed to update the props, right? So but why, right? Other than the conceit that a new series or a new movie needed to update the props to make them look cool, was there an in-universe reason why they were evolving and changing? And Dayton took the opportunity to write about each of those different things and kind of suggest why are things changing, and then some things changed to a certain degree and then they kind of went back, right? Like phasers kind of looked like pistols, handheld pistols for a while, and they kind of started looking like dust busters, and then they started to go back to phasers a little bit. So why was that? Why did that? Was it ergonomic change happen? And then again, we talk about Klingon weapons, Romulan weapons, other species. We even dropped in a couple little notes about the Jem'Hadar and the Hirogen, trying to get at some of the adversary species that are out there. Trying to, again, we didn't have the ability to go super deep into a lot of the species, but we're trying to hit the high notes, trying to hit the ones that are most likely to be used, that we think are most likely to be used in campaigns. But then, knowing that players and game masters will create their own stuff, right? They'll create their own species, and maybe they'll base it off of something that we've seen in canon, and then can use the descriptions and suggestions in the book to help inform that.
Jim, if I may ask, what's your favorite weapon in Star Trek?
In all of Star Trek? Gosh, that's a great question. God, I don't know if I actually have an answer for that. No one's asked. Again, to your credit, man, you do such a great job at these interviews. You always ask questions that nobody ever asked before. It's like, oh yeah, gosh, what is that? In my younger days as a theater nerd and stage combat, I kind of appreciated the Batleth because there were so many different things you could do with it, but it always looked so heavy, right? It looked like a really heavy, unwieldy kind of weapon, and it reminded me of some of the stage swords that we used that were really just wall hangers, and they weren't really meant for combat because they were just heavy and awkward, and the blades bent and stuff. But I didn't, and this will probably be criminal for me to say this, so some of you Star Trek fans, plug your ears, but I don't think the Batleth is all that elegant, right? I mean, I know Michael Dorn did a fabulous job, and the folks that designed it did a lot of cool, martial arts moves with it, but it just doesn't feel not safe, but I don't know, just like especially with the way they use it and the wrists. Like I'd be worried about breaking my wrists in some of those forms that they're using to fight with. But I guess if you really had to put me to it, you put the picture up. I think the Klingon disruptors from the movie era are really cool, right? Because like they've got the kind of like the linear barrel, and they got the long little the pipes and stuff on the barrel. And in fact, it's funny, and I'm sure this was intentional, although I didn't actually think about it until now. The disruptor pistols that the Klingons use are similar to how the design of the bird of prey is, right? You got the bird of prey with the long neck and the little kind of bulbous thing at the front where the cockpit is. And if you look at their disruptors, like the disruptors are kind of long and narrow, with the front end being kind of bulbous and then the back end being a little heavier. It's like I just like that connection, that design intention, that their weapons are similar to their starships, right? And I just think it's aggressive looking, and it's angular, and it's kind of cool. So yeah, nice job pulling this picture up, because it was like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. But like a lot of phasers are, they're phasers, and that doesn't excite me. And I'm trying to think of like some of the alien species and their unique weapons. Like the Lirpa, the Vulcan Lirpa, is interesting because it's a two-handed weapon. It's got a big like bag on one end and a blade on the other end. Okay, so that's kind of cool. You can get into like some quarterstaff stuff with that. But again, it just looks kind of unwieldy, right? I know, of course, Vulcans are stronger than humans by default, so they could probably wield it much more effectively than a human. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just rambling at this point. But good question, Manny. I'll have to come back to you next time. Next time I'll have a better answer for you. I'll have to watch more Star Trek.
And last but not least, Chapter 8, Starship Technologies.
Yep. So this goes into more details on starships themselves, and like some of the offensive and defensive technologies, like shields, inertial dampers, the navigational deflector. The navigational deflector has been a fabulous tool for Star Trek writers over the years to make it do things that you wouldn't even imagine it to do. Like, oh yeah, you can channel power into it and relens it, and all of a sudden it's a huge deflector dish, or all of a sudden it's a huge attractor, or there's all kinds of things you can do with it. So we play with that. Torpedoes, different types of propulsion. Again, talking a little bit about the reaction control systems on ships, the impulse drives, warp drives, other types of faster than light propulsion. There's a whole sidebar in there about how non-Federation species approach warp speed and impulse power, like what are their philosophies around it. Again, more complication tables. And then, the technical manual, the one that Okuda and Sternbach wrote, the Next Gen, went into really, really deep detail on how all these systems work. And again, we didn't have the space to do it, but what we did do is say, you got your life support system. Here's how it works, but what happens if it breaks? What do you do? That's like one of the most important systems on your ship. So if you all of a sudden don't have life support, what are you going to do before you no longer can do anything, right? So we kind of like talk about that a little bit and try to add detail beyond just how the technology works. Again, Star Trek Adventures is not it's not a simulationist kind of game, right? We're not counting phaser shots, and we're not counting megajoules of power or whatever, right? We're telling a story, and when you're telling a story, just like all the Star Trek writers over the last 60 years, you find ways to make the technology work the way you need it to work for the purpose of that episode, and then conveniently forget about it next time.
Well, excellent. I'm really happy that this book is out. Will be out, at least for everyone else. Thank you for Modiphius for giving us an early copy of this PDF. But I something about books like these, something about like books that talk about equipment and ships and so forth. I just love collecting them. There's a book I'm in a hunt for. I used to have a copy and I've lost it. And I'm trying to find another. I'm sure everyone remembers the Middle Earth role-playing game. There was a book called The Book of Treasure, I believe it's called. The name escapes me. But it's just a book of magic items. And even though I will never play MERP again, although I should never say never. But I just want to just having that in my collection just feels right. I just love collecting modern weapons, weapons from the 1920s and the Gaslight period, things like that. I don't know, this really interests me, and I'm glad that Star Trek has its own little book like this. It's only 130. Well, I think you said 128 pages, and the book is clean. The art is fantastic. The art dividers for each chapter is just amazing. For this one, I know I skimmed it real fast, but wow, look at that.
That caught my eye. That is
how about that love for the Oberth class, right? I know that the Oberth class was much maligned in Star Trek 3 when the poor Grissom got smoked by the Klingons, but that's a little workhorse, right? And there's groups out there playing their campaigns on Oberth class ships. It's like, why not give a little bit of love to them? It's one of the unappreciated classes of Starship. So, but yeah, I think Mark Bell did that piece of art, and I just love the glow from the tractor beam. Just really brings that piece out. Really nice stuff. But thank you for noticing it. Really, I'll let Ariel know. He always appreciates when folks are mentioning the art. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of great art in here. There's a piece, I don't remember what page it's on. There's a piece of a Cardassian labor camp with people escaping from it, and they're running through this force field as the force field is coming down. And it's just really cool the way the artist was able to put the little details in there. I'm really happy with the way the art has been coming out for a second edition as a whole. But actually, Manny, you brought a great point up. It sounds like you're collecting these types of books for the sake of reading them, just for the pleasure of reading them and for the content, right? You're actually looking at RPGs as literature to some extent. And if you haven't had an opportunity yet, I would encourage you to go check out Dice and Mind. They're another podcast that focuses on role-playing games, especially from that lens of buying an RPG book, and you may never play the game, but you're appreciating what's in the book from a reading and a storytelling perspective. And I think that was one of the design intentions for this technical manual, was that maybe you're a casual Star Trek fan, maybe you're not even playing the game, but you want some cool information about technology, and not just the technology from the Star Trek from 30 years ago. You want to see some of the newer stuff too, or you want to see the full spectrum of what's available in Star Trek. Hopefully this book is going to deliver some of that. Maybe you're a Captain's Log player, maybe you're a first edition player, and you still want new content for your game. I think except for chapter 1, everything in this book is usable in first edition. And I bet there's some creative players out there who can take all the stuff in chapter 1 for the character mechanics and use it in first edition. And I probably have to go refresh my memory and look at it. I'm willing to bet most of it ports over to first edition without even blinking an eye, right? Because the talents and the focuses and stuff, and none of that changed from edition to edition, right? It was just really taking the challenge dice out and doing some rejiggering. So so hopefully, if you're not into the game, like Manny was saying, like maybe you're just looking for a cool book to read and just get yourself steeped into some more Star Trek love, check it out.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about Star Trek Adventures.
Always happy to.
Especially about that technical manual, which should be out in March 2025. You could pick it up either through Drive to RPG when it comes out, or through, of course, the Modiphius website, US and UK version. So before I say goodbye, I just want to say real fast, I want to dedicate this episode to Tony Todd. Totally got snubbed at the Oscars in the memoriam section. And I think we all agreed, as great as Michael Dorn was for bringing the character of Worf and showing that side of Klingon, culture and science fiction, Tony Todd playing his brother is just as important, I think, to the overall story of Klingons as well.
Absolutely. And I think his portrayal of the alternate universe Jake in The Visitor really added something to that character, and that whole dynamic between Jake and Sisko that even carried through to Sirach Lofton's performances. So very much missed Tony Todd, but great call out.
Everyone, thank you for watching. Again, I'll put all the links in the description below. Stay safe out there. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching Really Dicey. Oh, like and subscribe.
Be well, everybody.